Oh, Michael, you're muted.
My name is Michael McDonnell. I am the cybersecurity librarian. This is my co-host, Moro Arakaki. Hey, Moro, how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Yourself, Michael?
I'm doing great. So we should do a little introduction.
We should.
So welcome to this very special live stream of Moro and Mike. Many of you at BSides don't know what that is. Moro and I, earlier this year, decided to start a YouTube live stream that was about the professional issues in cybersecurity. And here at BSides, Fortinet is a sponsor. We thank them, and especially Nahid Hassani from Fortinet. He had this great idea. As a sponsor, they get a sponsored session, which would normally be a technical deep dive of the vendor's product. And Nahid, embracing the spirit of BSides, said, this is about the community. And he is a fan of ours, and we're a fan of his. And he asked us if he would like to take over the spot and do a community-led session. And we said, can we do anything we want? And he said, yeah. And so we assembled a panel of experts to do a discussion on a topic that's been near and dear in our professional discussions about how difficult it is to explain cyber threats and cyber risk to a non-technical leadership audience. And so that's what we're doing here today. So I'd like to first start off by thanking the BSides organizers, who are really awesome. It's a lot of work to put on a conference.
Absolutely.
I have a special thanks for them because we have our own platform for live streaming, and we said, could we use that and stream into your platform for the conference? And they didn't have to do that, and they did, which could have been a horrible amount of difficult work for them. It turned out it was easy, and that's what we're doing. Also, really want to thank Fortinet, both for sponsoring BSides and making that happen, and for being so much into the BSides spirit that we could do this community-led panel in their spot. So full disclosure, Moro and Mike has nothing to do with Fortinet, but Moro, you work for Fortinet.
Yes, so I'm an SC based out of Calgary, and yes, as Michael mentioned, I work for Fortinet. So that's the disclaimer I'm going to say, but the talk really won't be on Fortinet itself. So just a thank you to them for helping us, I guess, deliver this message on their time. So
that said, all of the panelists are folks that I know and met, and I invited them because I think they have a lot to say about this topic. And so, without further ado, let's bring them on. So we have Doug Howell from the director of IT from the Little Potato Company. Doug's kind of internet famous if you're in a Microsoft shop, because during Microsoft Ignite, none less than the CEO of Microsoft gave your team a shout out. So I'm just kind of a fanboy and happy to have you here. And then we've got Debbie Mazurek from the city of Calgary, team lead for an information security team there. I met you at a curriculum feedback group at SAIT years ago, and I thought you articulated the full spectrum of what we do in information security better than anyone in the room, including myself. And so I thought that's who I'd like to have on this panel. And then we have Andrew Howell, for the director of IS Risk at Wawanesa. What did I just say?
You said my last name.
Yeah.
So, disclaimer: Andrew's my boss, and I'm now fired. Andrew wasn't my boss when we organized this thing, so I talked myself into and out of a job. That quick.
Well done. Well done.
All right. So what I'd like to do is, this is a thing on Moro Mike. We don't introduce our guests, really. We let them introduce themselves. And so before we get into the heart of the matter, I'm just going to go around and ask each of you to introduce yourself. I'm going to start with Andrew, since I can't get your name right. Can you tell us who you are, what you do?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Dunsford. As Michael mentioned, Director of IS Risk at Wawanesa Insurance. So effectively, the team and I look after cybersecurity, cyber risk, and I gather that's how I got talked into speaking to you today.
Next, Debbie. Who are you? What do you do?
Hey, everyone. My name's Debbie Mazurek. My official title is Team Lead of Compliance and Advisory Services at the City of Calgary. I'm a proud city employee. Mike and I met once a few years back, and it was great to hear from him, and I'm really happy to support BSides and chat about risk. Thanks again.
Doug.
Hi, Doug Howell with the Little Potato Company. I'm based in Edmonton. I hope the viewers of this BSides talk won't hold that against me. We have about 400 employees. We have offices and operations spanning Canada and the US, and I oversee all IT systems and security at Little Potato.
Fantastic. So we've got Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, all represented here on the panel. We have a small agriculture, retail business, insurance, and a municipality. And what we're here to talk about today is the challenge that we have in IT and cybersecurity of having to explain cyber threats and risk to our non-technical leaders. And let me just preface the discussion before we get into the roundtable to explain to the audience what I think that means. We as professionals in this field get very used to speaking in detailed technical terms with our peers. It helps us do our job to speak in technical terms, to dissect and analyze problems. The treatment of or the mitigation of specific threats, the identification of threats, it depends crucially on the details. However, we have to communicate to decision makers who don't come from IT, who don't have the cybersecurity background that we do, who may not be technical, and it's still on them to make those decisions about the risk. And our challenge is, how do we communicate that? How do we switch gears? How do we win them over? How do we get our point across? It is a challenge. And I would say this topic came up as a discussion in our Discord server, and there was no shortage of challenging stories of the challenges. And so what we'd like to do here today is talk about what it means to communicate these risks, the challenges that we have, who we can work with and partner with to champion our ideas, and I hope about some of our success stories. Everyone giggles.
Of course.
So Moro, do you want to lead the
Sure.
the questioning?
Yeah, sure. So I guess we'll just start it off with I guess we're looking at maybe the top challenges that everyone has experienced in explaining risk and threats to some non-technical people. So I'm going to start off by throwing this ball to Doug and just ask him, what are some of those challenges that you've experienced explaining threats and risk to non-technical people?
Well, the first one I'll say is technical people. We can easily defer to talking in technical terms. One specific example I'll give is using acronyms. I'd suggest eliminating acronyms whenever possible. Earlier in my career, I used the term BYOD. I'm sure everyone listening to this broadcast knows what BYOD is. Well, I had an executive put up his hand and ask, what's bring your own drink have to do with this? So I was not getting my point across by using acronyms such as that in this presentation. So that'd be my takeaway, is take away the technical language as much as possible.
Couldn't agree more. Sometimes I think we as technical people get a little too enamored with acronyms and trying to go technical and assuming that other people understand us, and that's usually not the case. So same question to you, Debbie. I guess what have you faced, especially from a municipality standpoint?
I think in my circumstances, we have so many varieties of businesses in the city that a lot of them are really insulated from IT. It's not their main focus. Their main focus is serving citizens, and so because of that insulation, they have never experienced any kind of IT-related breach or some sort of security incident. They don't understand the potential impact that could be associated with some of those impacts. And we were joking earlier about having, if you have an incident, never let a good one go to waste, because your business clients, your business units will have a lot more skin in the game if they've experienced an incident. So.
Isn't that the truth? I think for a lot of us, in non-technical daily life, I guess the best analogy would be something like, you don't really buy life insurance until you've experienced someone else that has to deal with an event that happened where life insurance would have helped them, right? So, and I guess with that, I'm going to segue to Andrew because he works in the insurance industry. So.
Sure. Yeah, sure enough. So I guess I generally approach it with explaining technical scenarios to non-technical folks with analogies. So a prime example or a recent example I had was trying to explain the difference between a high or a critical vulnerability versus a medium vulnerability, and kind of why would we have a higher tolerance for medium vulnerabilities as opposed to higher criticals? And I kind of made the parallel to, okay, if you have a house, you have an attached garage. You have a door to your garage, and then you have a door for the car to actually drive into the garage. If you keep the outer door shut and leave the inner door unlocked, that is an example of a medium vulnerability, because something else has to fail in order for that to become a problem. So that resonated with a number of folks in the room, and I guess the virtual room, because hey, COVID. But that drove the point home and was accepted by the audience.
Okay, so I guess, then this kind of goes into the second question of what do you do to measure risk? So I guess that makes sense, right? You have to explain at what level a threat may turn into a risk, right? Like what type of risk that is. So I guess with that in mind, then, and I'm going to throw this to you, Andrew. What do you use to measure risk, so to speak, in terms of how that's going to affect your organization, I guess?
Okay, so just an easy one then. Thanks, Moro. Appreciate that. It really does depend on what you're looking at. So what the type of threat is, the scenario, whether you're talking about availability of a critical business system. So
sure. I guess in your case, in your organization, financial risk is a huge thing, right? Because that is your business, is dealing with finances and insurance in itself, right?
Yeah, it's making sure that when people have an actual loss, that we are there to help them kind of recover and kind of restore their lives back together. So that's the majority of our business. So making sure that we do have those assets on hand to help out at the time is critical.
Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to throw this one to Doug because I know he's in a slightly different industry where it's kind of like, I think he's supply chain, retail, manufacturing, and agriculture. So
He does it all.
Yeah,
exactly.
but I'm Andrew mentioned availability, and I said don't use acronyms, but I'm a huge fan of the CIA triad, like just explaining confidentiality, integrity, availability to business units, because you can pull out, Andrew used examples. Like I think from those you can find tangible examples in all those business areas. Like what matters to you? Does it matter that the system is always available? Does it matter that we keep your information secret? Right? Different departments, different applications have different priorities for those things. And so I found that very helpful to frame that. I think, again, a non-technical person might just go to, well, information security means keeping hackers out, but that's not all that we do. There's a whole bunch more aspects to it beyond that.
Sure. No, I agree. For example, when email goes down, you know what? everyone is going to call you and saying, "What's up?" Right? So, or even a phone system.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The other thing I'd add too is like not all things are can be quantified with money either. A website to Facebook, for us, we don't sell product on there. That wouldn't necessarily have a monetary impact like many other risks we might measure, but might have a brand impact. So it's less tangible, but still has an impact to our business.
Yeah, no, for sure. Oftentimes we try to save face in those situations as well too. So right. So Debbie, I guess again from a municipality's standpoint, what are some of those elements that I guess were things that you use to explain risk?
Well, it's really similar, and it does matter which leader or which line of business we're talking to, because they all have their own concerns and they all have their own priorities. Somebody in recreation, for example, will have a different set of risk priorities and tolerance for threat than, say, somebody in the water department, right? The impact to somebody, the impacts for a breach or something going wrong in the water side is certainly bigger and way more serious probably than the recreation side. And that's not up to us to say one is right or one is wrong, but really at the end of the day, the business, whatever business or line of service it is, they have to come up with some way to prioritize at a higher level across the city for citizens. So it's the same thing. It's what's important to them.
They need to have a risk tolerance understanding. What is reasonable, what isn't.
Yeah, and we can help them kind of tease that out. And just like Doug mentioned, that CIA triangle is super important. And then we throw the S, the safety, into the triangle too, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that actually brings up a good point. Especially when you're talking about water services and operational technologies, I think oftentimes we overlook those elements and don't realize that, hey, maybe it's not a monetary thing there, but it's, again, in a municipality's standpoint, it's delivering those services, critical services to the population, right? To the people that the city is serving. So, very, very critically important when you're talking about those things, to explain that to non-technical people. So I guess with that in mind then, in terms of getting that message across, are there certain ways, are there like champions, I guess, inside the organization that you have to hit? And in those cases, like how do we interact with those people when we're going about doing this? So I'm just going to throw this one out, and whoever wants to pick up the ball first.
I'll pick it up.
Okay.
In our business, I have a couple. One's definitely our finance group. Now, in my business, we happen to have the same boss, so that certainly helps right there. But examples are going to go well beyond that is finance is a group that thinks in terms of risk inherently. They have to deal with things like insurance. They might be dealing with forward contracts for currency to mitigate risk, right? It's just like we would mitigate something in security. They're doing the same thing from a direct financial perspective in our business. So they're a natural partner that way because they also think in financial risk, and many IT risks are financial risk. And I'll actually give another example where, phishing, obviously a huge risk to all our organizations, I'm sure. we worked in partner with them to harden our organization. We knew there was technical controls we could put in, but we also worked with them on process controls. So they've hardened our resistance to wiring money somewhere unexpected from a process perspective, and they've embedded that in their organization. So even if you get past the technical controls, we've got process controls that live within that department. So that to me is like the best defense in depth. And then auditors have also been a great partner. Even when they're very quantitative, there's always gonna be a qualitative aspect in the reports preparing and stuff. And I've used that to highlight the things that I want to make sure get in front of our board and our executive team.
Okay, yeah, no, and that's a good point. I guess certain sizes of organizations won't necessarily have a CISO, for example. Someone to bridge that, I guess, technical gap and still deliver that message to the higher decision makers in your organization. So, yeah, that's a good point, right? Sometimes you have to work with other groups such as finance or auditors to kind of help bridge that, I guess, messaging. So. With that, I guess, Debbie, do you have any, aspect points especially from a municipality standpoint?
Well, we've had good success with, partnering with supply or with lawyers, right? The lawyers can really help in the supply chain, making sure there's language about vulnerability management or about risk management in contracts, right? So if you're going to go buy a cloud service or some sort of technology, then make sure that the language in the contract is going to work for you, right? So we've got good relationships and good friendships with the lawyers. And then another team that's really been just amazing to work with for our point is the communication team. We have communicators embedded in our business unit, and they're just so skilled at taking our clumsy words and here's help us explain this, and they're very good at that.
Absolutely. Actually, I know we were talking about this during our dry run, but Michael and I, we hosted one of our live streams a few weeks ago, and we actually invited someone that was a part of the mentorship group for communicators in Calgary. And I'll tell you, good communication is really, really a fine art. It's certainly something that people can pick up as a skill, but being able to communicate is tremendously important, especially when you're explaining these types of things to non-technical people. So I think it's critically important if you don't have that skill to obviously go and try and learn it, but then at the same time leverage those people that may already possess that skill. So as you mentioned, Debbie, leveraging the communication department. So that's some awesome advice.
I'm going to second that because Debbie's point about we think of who would champion us? Oh, people who maybe understand what we're saying. Well, no, it's all these other professions that have their own specialties that we can leverage, that we can work with. In fact, I'd say that when we do our live streams, our most successful topics are when we bring in guests who have nothing to do with cybersecurity. HR professionals, communications professionals, that's really where the heart of the matter is.
Yeah, no, and you're right, Michael, because last night's live stream we brought on a guest that was a part of, sorry, I can't remember the acronym now because I've totally forgotten it.
The Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, part of
Right,
CSP.
right. And, she had a great slide on that showed that, what they look for in cybersecurity professionals isn't necessarily the perception. Like when they look for hires, they look at multidisciplinary hires. Like they were looking at people in, social sciences just as much as, computer science or mathematics. So I think it's fundamentally important to realize that, security isn't just a matter of, being able to hack a box or, break some sort of cryptographic algorithm.
You only like that because they emphasize poli-sci degrees and you have a poli-sci degree.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so I'm going to leave, I don't want to leave this topic. I want to give it to Andrew because, he's a part of that industry, especially in finance and insurance, and that runs possibly a bit different. So,
sure. So I'd say a number of the groups that we deal with are procurement folks because it is a absolutely interconnected world. Everyone's using a lot of SaaS and a lot of third-party services to do their own service delivery and solution delivery. So making sure, as Debbie highlighted, with the lawyers, but also ensuring that those folks are delivering what they said they're delivering at a secure posture is critical. Our communications folks to kind of, those are marketers. Let's help them. Let's leverage them to market our message, and they do it for, detailed financials. I think sometimes people forget that different disciplines have their own version of a technical language or speak. So if you go into meet with a severely talented financial person, you're going to have a series of acronyms, ratios, etc., so on thrown at you. Well, I think IT gets a bad rap for that because there are different niches there that exist. Sorry, side rant. Audit.
We're here for the side rant.
Yeah, I know.
That's right.
Yeah, but our auditors as well, just kind of having those risk discussions about, okay, so you found this minor detail. Cool. Help us turn this into an actual ability to get something accomplished that really does mitigate risk for the company. And as well, with our organization, we have an enterprise risk group that kind of spans across each of the different business units to make sure that we are appropriately dealing with risks that come up.
Okay. Right on. Okay, so I guess moving on a bit here. So this question's probably more specific to Debbie, and we kind of touched on it briefly before. And that was the idea that, are there, I guess, groups that you maybe communicate with? And I mean, specifically with municipalities. I know there's an organization called MISA, and they're regional, so the MISA Prairies would be probably where Calgary fits into, where you share some of these thought ideas, and maybe you use maybe someone comes up with a great business outcome. Do you guys share that type of information, and maybe does that help you with communicating risks and threats to, again, I guess the stakeholders? I guess in your case, it would be, I think, city council or maybe even your immediate boss. Debbie?
Yeah, I think there are lots of different professional organizations available to share information. And I think that's especially true in the municipality space. But I mean, any industry would be able to have those same kinds of user groups, I guess. I know that our IT folks, they do a lot of common benchmarking with similar size municipalities across the city. Are we delivering similar services? Are we do we have the same kind of investments? Do we have the same kind of value back to taxpayers? All of those kinds of questions, I think, are common questions that every municipality faces. So I think there's some sharing there, depending on what level you are in the organization. I know if we have specific technical questions about a technology or about how are you going about doing X, we reach out to other municipalities all the time, right? We've talked to the city of Ottawa about how they're delivering a certain cloud platform, or we talk to Edmonton about what are you doing for some of your PCI things, or we're involved in the security of next gen 911 delivery, right? So, and that's across Canada. So, I mean, all of those different kinds of services, all kind of, I think there's definitely opportunities to mix and mingle and learn about each other. So,
okay,
I would say
cool.
it exists. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool, especially when it comes to municipalities, just because you're not really competing against each other in a really high level or anything. So I think it just kind of opens it up so you guys can share information in a more freely and open way. Of course,
I think relationships matter too. I think if you have to know who to call, or you have to know a person that knows a person. What are those networks, right?
Yeah,
so that's really important.
No, so yeah, I'm going to throw this to Andrew and Doug just to see if they have something similar, I guess, in their industries where they might interact with peers, even with companies that might be their competitor, competing companies, and if they get anything out of that.
Sure. So there is, as Michael highlighted, FSISAC, which is really about the financial services information sharing. That's more on, I'll say, the threat side of the house. But meeting with peers across the different insurers to understand, in some cases, so Moro, sorry, but sometimes we talk about different vendors and kind of understand.
Totally understand.
who's doing it right and who's having challenges and what they've done to overcome that. And it's really about kind of advancing in the organizations and to a broader degree making sure that those organizations are viable going forward. So it's the information sharing both from a threat perspective, but as well as just generally networking and helping somebody out is also a key aspect, as Debbie highlighted.
Couldn't agree more. So Doug, I guess, how does it look for you guys?
Yeah, nothing, I'd say specific to cyber threats and risk, nothing I participate in our industry or that I'm aware of, but certainly a focus of a lot of my networking is building a network of other people that work, IT professionals working in produce, right? Being that's our industry. So have got to know people down in different parts of the US, major produce growing regions, to understand what they're using from a technology stack. So not necessarily specific to cyber defense per se, but more how they enable their business. So that's a big one. And then of course, in Edmonton, networking through groups that might have other mid-sized businesses like ours, whether it be BSides or the CIO Association, right? I participate in as many of those types of groups as I can fit in.
Okay, right on. Okay, I guess with that, success stories, because I know Michael mentioned it, and hopefully you guys can share something.
I want to back up just one second, because we have a question from the audience here.
Okay.
So Ken asks, can someone advocate in favor of pointers, tips discussing risk with the nonprofit sector? And in particular, he says, explaining the risks or the benefits of a risk register, self-certifying with PCI. And I kind of think, in finance, we do have some of that self-certification as well, not just nonprofit. We have OSFI cyber self-assessment that we do. Does anyone want to?
I could take a stab at it if you like.
Yeah.
So for a not-for-profit, profit, whatever, there's a reason the business or that organization exists. So it's understanding what threats would cause that business to no longer deliver on its mission or on its proposition. So establishing that risk register of, okay, so what would stop us from actually delivering this service to help these constituents? As probably Debbie can speak with water. So what would impact us from delivering clean and safe water to the constituents of the municipality? Or if it's a social service, similar thing. What stops us from doing business? And using PCI as an option. There's many different benchmarks and many different frameworks to kind of evaluate against.
I'd second just on that framework comment. We did an exercise a couple of years ago. We brought in an outside consulting company and stepped through, used a number of frameworks to guide the discussion as we identified those areas and what controls we might want, but we didn't say we had to align with one. If some of those controls didn't make sense and we had no regulatory requirement to be in line with, say, all of PCI, we weren't going to mandate those. So I'd look at it going, what matters to your business? Why take some of the pieces of PCI if you don't need it based on your risks? They may just not be worth implementing.
Interesting.
Yeah, nonprofits often have confidential data, like what you would really want to go through some sort of exercise to identify those crown jewels, right? What is the most important asset that this enterprise or this nonprofit has? Are you adequately protecting them? If you don't protect them and they escape, what happens? What is the impact there? So those kinds of questions you can play, what if with your stakeholders and with the people involved.
Okay.
So Nathan asks us, the timing was just perfect, actually. Anyone who knows Nathan knows he knows how to ask a good question. So what is beyond the crown jewels? And he put this in the context of saying, okay, so how do you personalize risk for your organization? A municipality is different than insurance or agriculture. Is it just about the crown jewels of your data, or is there something more about the functioning of your business?
I think Doug actually spoke to this one quite well with the CIA triad is, it's more than just, I'll take a stab, Doug, because I don't know the business, but, what kind of volume, what we're producing and what crops we're producing in which area, you want to ensure that those services are available, not necessarily the crown jewels of, hey, we're growing X volume of crop in this area. So it depends on the business.
Yeah, well, what will be more damaging, a contract that's no doubt confidential between a vendor and or a customer and us, or the fact that our plant is down and we can't fulfill their orders, right? So it's not just about data itself, right? It is about delivering the services the business needs. The water example that Debbie had as well, right? It's not, no doubt there's confidential information in there, well, a customer database, but the measure of satisfaction for the public, no doubt, will be safe, healthy water coming out of your tap.
Yeah, availability in that case. If your toilets stop flushing, that is not a good thing. So in that case, the priority for the business is availability, way over. There's very, very little information that's confidential in the water business, but availability is everything. So, but back to the comment about the nonprofit sector, that's something you have to understand in nonprofit is really what is the most important aspect of that nonprofit. Are you doing something? Is there some operational activity there? Or is it just, are you connecting different people? Like, I guess you'd have to understand the nature of the nonprofit. Right?
I think an interesting thing about nonprofits is they're often mission-based, whereas quite a bit of our compliance in private industry is based around protecting data objects, right? We're told you must protect this data. There's a compliance requirement for it. And it's not that nonprofits don't have that, but when you start thinking about that service-oriented approach to modeling your threats, it suddenly becomes, the threats to a nonprofit are anything that impacts their ability to deliver on their mission, regardless. What's funny is where I want to go with that is actually the basis of this whole thing. So I want to talk about threat modeling. And we can't really have a talk about threat modeling with our non-technical leaders. But it is one of those exercises that I feel provides the guts for communicating with our leaders. Without doing that modeling, we never get down to, well, what are we really talking about? What are we protecting? What's vulnerable? And how do we judge the risk and communicate what's acceptable?
Okay. So Michael, I think we have another question from Adam.
I'm just putting that up on the screen now.
Cool. Thank you.
So Adam is asking, it doesn't all fit on the screen, so I'm just going to put it up there as is.
Sure.
Is your senior executive leadership starting to actually understand technology risk and seeking your advice proactively, or are you still having to push the awareness message uphill?
I'd say, it's definitely not like it was. I think there's a lot more awareness because things like phishing and ransomware attacks are in the mainstream media on a weekly basis, and there's so many large recognizable names that are attached to these types of incidents already over the last 3 or 4 years especially. So I think they have a lot more awareness. I know we've had executive team members or board members that have gone through sort of that oversight governance type activities where IT risk is a module they're trained on now, right? Like, it's like you should be asking about IT risk. So they're getting it from that top down, even above them now, where they have an awareness that wasn't probably built into that type of development 10 or 15 years ago, I would guess. And then, I can say personally, like we've also had good success where the opportunities we've had to elevate it to our board and executive team, they inherently have more awareness now as well.
Okay. And would you say that that's like more, I don't know, and maybe I don't understand their mentality. Do you think that maybe it's because of the reputational damage that, getting your name broadcast in the news would bring? Is that why they would kind of come to you? Or is it still back in the mind, it's like, oh, ransomware, I had to pay out this organization had to pay out $30 million. We can't afford to do that. That'll cripple my business. Or is it maybe a little bit of both?
I think you just touched on it right there, Moro, of it's, and Michael, in our pre-show, we kind of talked about the global survey on kind of emerging threats. There is a wide understanding that cyber threats, cyber risk is a company killer in the top 10, top 3 for the last few years. So it'd be kind of bury your head in the sand if you're not at least talking about it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, specifically. Okay, so I'm sure that everyone in the audience, if you've been in cybersecurity for say the last 5-10 years, you've noticed that there's been a shifting emphasis and focus, heightened anxieties. If you track global measures of what risk managers and CEOs and CFOs measure for the top 10 risks in industries, geographical locations, or globally, you'll note that before 2012, the risk of cyber attack was not on the top 10. It was not considered a risk. When I worked in the oil and gas industry, this was always plaguing me because you couldn't convince someone who was actively under threat to address it because to a risk manager or to a CEO, it just wasn't there. And then what caught me off guard, even though I track those things, is the last 3 years. So in 2012, 2013, 2014, it finally got on the top 10. And the last 3 years, it skyrocketed to the top 3. The World Economic Forum just released their 2020 report. And cyber attack for many, many geographical locations, it's in the top 1 for Canada in one particular sector. It outweighed the risk related to the pandemic. Now, just think about what that means. We're not pushing this uphill anymore. I think Andrew and I have had a recent experience where it certainly turned around and it's like, wait, they're asking us to address cybersecurity. When did this message change that we're asking them to listen to us about addressing it? And they're coming to us like, what are you guys? Yeah.
Another one I think that ties to that makes me think of Canada's isn't been as public yet, but I think it's the National Cybersecurity Center here. And then I know the one in the UK and the one in Australia put out some great quality work that just to help organizations of all sizes just become more familiar with cyber risk. Right. Again, the Canadian one's off to a bit slower start. I know I've looked at lots of the stuff the UK and Australia do. And I think, in a private business, especially like in certain industries or in the public sector, you might already have certain regulatory requirements. We don't have many, but if we don't do our jobs decently, I think regulators and the government will come down because they want to make sure that the economy is protected. In our case, we're part of the food supply. It's important that we remain available.
I find that if at the municipality level, it's a bit of meat in the middle. There's definitely people come to us saying, "Hey, is my service secure? Can you help me find out? Because I don't know." And then we can go through the exercises of risk assessments or testing or whatever they have to make sure that their service is going to have some resilience. From a municipal level, resilience is a major issue, and there's lots of really smart people that's their job, is they figure out, well, how resilient are we to threat X or to threat Y? And it's not only cyber risk, it's all kinds of other things, right? But it's definitely one of those features, and those kinds of questions get asked at council and at all kinds of different levels in the corporation. But we still have people that don't understand, why do I have to change my password every 90 days? Like, I don't want to do this. So we still have to make sure that we're addressing, even every single user as well. So there's a gamut there. There's definitely a spectrum about communicating different things to different people.
I love that word resilience, because that ties so much to the pandemic and the challenges many of us, our businesses, have gone through as well.
Yeah, and that really, I think, is a perfect example of all of a sudden, boom, we're in a global pandemic. Are you ready to continue your operations when our lives are on the line here? And a lot of companies were able to change on a dime, and some weren't. So it's just part of another risk question.
So, Michael, I think we have a question from Mitchell.
Yeah. Okay. So Mitchell asks, what are your thoughts on security validation platforms? Continuous security validation platforms. I'm not. Is that a like a Gartner category? This doesn't ring a bell for me.
Sounds kind of Gartnerish.
Vulnerability management.
Could be.
Okay, I actually want to get into that topic because we didn't, when we were talking about measures of risk, I don't think anyone mentioned vulnerability as a measure of risk. And I think that's actually one of our historic failures is we had vulnerability scanners, and we could continuously measure, and the vulnerability scanners put out risk ratings. And we've got some good measures for it, but using those with our non-technical leaders, using vulnerability as our primary metric hasn't been very successful, because it doesn't align, like with everything our panelists have said, it does not align with what's the mission of the business, what services do we offer, which security principles does that help protect.
So
So what?
Yes, exactly.
Now what?
You're vulnerable. So what? The whole business is vulnerable. That's why we have the leaders. That's why we have the other 9 items in the top 10 risks to the organization. Yeah.
And if they aren't internet-facing remote code execution, presumably you have done other things. So they are a medium, not a high.
Yeah. We are now coming to the close of the hour. We're going to 55 minutes past the hour. So I think it's time to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, Michael, can I ask one thing from everybody? Just one piece of advice, I think, from each of you. Something that you can give as advice to a security practitioner in helping them explain risk. So I know that was something that Debbie had mentioned last week, and I thought that was a great question that I could throw at everybody. I usually like to finish off with like that type of question, anyways, just to help out our audience, right? So one piece of advice, if you could offer it. We'll start with Andrew.
Sure. It ties back to the comment before about working with a not-for-profit. There is a reason the company that you're working for or the business you're in exists. So tying things back to putting that in jeopardy, that on delivering its mission, on delivering its value, that has pretty clear business linkage. So if you can tie it like that, you'll be successful.
Thanks. Okay, Debbie.
I think my number one tip for people struggling to get their message across, get that technical language into a business-friendly context would be spend some time on self-awareness. Go figure out what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and then figure out what is the way that your executive team likes to be communicated to. So if that you got 5 minutes and you need to have an impactful message, really learn how to do that kind of impact, and often it's because your preference is to be too detailed, or so self-awareness. Go take a disk profile or something like that. I find that's really helpful.
Awesome, thank you. And Doug.
Okay, I might do two.
Okay.
So I think it came up earlier. Never waste a good crisis or a bad crisis, I guess. And on the other side of that, though, I'd say don't wait for an incident to celebrate your successes. So show when you have got a project done, you've made improvements. Also take the opportunity to show that off where you can, and that might even be some geeking out, like, hey, look at this cool tool, and we stopped all this sophisticated threats. So I think it's okay. Non-tech people like to see, this is where our money's going. That's really neat, really powerful.
True.
The other one too, Andrew mentioned procurement as being one of those partners, and I think embedding security thinking, whether it's IT leading it or in other business units, that security is thought of from the outset. So and that might be standards, like we're only going to work with SaaS vendors that can produce a SOC 2 report or support our identity platform. If you have standards, but no matter what, and Michael mentioned threat modeling, embed those things in the discussion at the outset of going to market for a new product or a new vendor.
Okay, cool.
So Moro, I'm going to wrap up because I promised the organizers we wouldn't go and hear on Moro and Mike. We usually go 30 minutes over.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to offer one last thought, and it's actually to the young professionals and the students in our audience. Every single one of us in cybersecurity and in IT needs to be able to talk about threats, vulnerability, and risk. And I'd encourage you to start using those terms in your vocabulary, and learn the difference between them, because it will pay off year after year after year as you begin to try to get your ideas across to your leaders. And with that, I'd like to thank our audience, and I'm going to play the outro music.
Can we also thank our panelists, BSides, and again, Fortinet for allowing us to have this talk. If you're interested in Fortinet or Fortinet technologies, please reach out to your local account team.
Thank you so much. All right.
All right.
And with that, we're out.
Thanks, folks.